Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Before I get started, I want to wish you all a happy new year. I hope you enjoyed your holidays. And I also want to let you all know that I'm going to do a follow-up video to my video on Cosby. I read your comments, and I've also come across a few articles dealing with Bill Cosby, and I've engaged in debates online. And I just want to continue that discussion. I'm going to provide a more detailed response and just talk about the whole issue. So look forward to that. I expect to have that done probably this weekend. It'll probably be Sunday evening at the latest. So that's something to look out. But I wanted to take time right now to talk about this situation in Burns, Oregon. Last year, Cliven Bundy, a white elderly rancher, had a standoff with the federal government. Him and his supporters, they had their guns aimed at federal law enforcement officers. And now you have this new situation right now in Burns, Oregon, this being led by Cliven Bundy's sons. 150 white armed militiamen have taken over federal property. They are occupying the National Wildlife Reserve there. And this demonstration has been going on for at least 2 days. And according to one of the articles that I read, and I will include links to all the sources for this video right here. But in that article, it pointed out how the protesters indicated that they are willing to kill and be killed if necessary. And according to this article, it says that law enforcement has zero plans to do anything about this. After a 2-day armed protest, law enforcement has zero plans to do anything. That's outrageous to me. And I'm going to further discuss that a little bit later on in this video. Apparently, these people are protesting because they want to express their support for 2 ranchers who have been convicted of arson. And they're scheduled to be sent to jail. They have been sentenced to 5 years in prison. And these ranchers are demonstrating. They're saying that the government is violating their constitutional rights by taking land and all this and that. So they are up in arms and they are demonstrating with arms, with guns. I first read about this story last night. So I was eager to hear what the news was going to say about it this morning. So I flipped through various news channels, and I noticed that this story was buried. I noticed that this story was reduced to a footnote. I noticed that this story was just mentioned in passing. They talked about everything under the sun on the Today Show and on other morning programs. And this whole standoff thing was just brushed aside as if it was insignificant. They spent more time this morning on these news programs talking about Donald Trump and talking about Bill Clinton's sex life. They thought that that stuff was more important than this standoff that's taking place, where you have these armed white men seizing control over federal property. But as far as the media is concerned, that's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's insignificant. I imagine if that was some Muslims taking over some federal property, it would be a very big deal. I imagine if that was a group of black people taking over some federal property, I understand that that would be a big deal. But when it comes to white people, they are given a pass. It's no big deal. And then I was actually watching this news clip where they had this analyst from CNN basically trying to justify why this armed demonstration is not being treated as harshly by law enforcement as Black Lives Matter demonstrations or a demonstration that may have been held by Muslims. And this man basically said, well, they're not looting or anything, so there's no need for a harsh reaction by law enforcement. And he also emphasized that this was in a rural area in the middle of nowhere, so there's no need to take prompt action. I think that's ridiculous. I think that that is absurd. I think that that represents the kind of double standards that we see in American society. It represents a prime example of white privilege at its height. You have plenty of examples of nonviolent Black Lives Matter people protesting, and they are met with brutal violence. And when that happens, instead of demonizing the people that inflict the violence on Black Lives Matter demonstrators, they attack and vilify Black Lives Matter. They demonize Black Lives Matter. Not too long ago, I did a video about how some white supremacists went to a Black Lives Matter demonstration and they antagonized the situation. And they provoked the Black Lives Matter demonstrators. And those demonstrators told those people to leave. And they tried to get them to leave from the demonstration. And those white supremacists opened fire on the Black Lives Matter protesters. And at the end of the day, you had all these people trying to justify the shooting of unarmed black protesters. Trying to justify this. And then those white supremacists, they were given some minor charges despite shooting 5 Black Lives Matter protesters. This is the kind of society that we live in. A society of double standards. A society where white people can commit all kinds of atrocities and the media doesn't consider them to be terrorists. They can shoot up a Planned Parenthood office and it's not terrorism. You can have a little white boy, some affluent rich white boy get drunk and kill 4 people and it's no big deal. He gets a slap on the wrist because he suffers from affluenza. This is the kind of society we live in with double standards. Here you have these armed white people, these damn terrorists, occupying federal property. I don't hear Fox News calling them thugs. I don't hear them calling them thugs or gangsters or any of that. But when Trayvon Martin was killed by a wannabe punk-ass cop, they called Trayvon Martin the thug. But they didn't call the killer the thug. An unarmed black boy is a thug. But a 150 deep white militia is not considered to be thugs. This is the kind of racism that we have in this country. Can you imagine what would happen if some black people did this? If black people took over a federal building and they had an armed demonstration, can you imagine what happened? What would happen in that situation? All you have to do is look back at what happened in Philly. And from what I recall, I think that was in the 80s or maybe the 70s, I'm not sure. But they actually dropped bombs. The law enforcement authorities dropped bombs on MOVE protesters. And they killed children and women and men. That's how they deal with black people when we take up arms. You all remember Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old black boy in Cleveland, Ohio, who was playing with a toy gun. Playing with a toy gun. The police just rolled up on him and shot that brother within 2 seconds. They didn't give the brother a chance to explain that he had a toy gun. They didn't give the brother a chance to do anything. They shot him, they killed him, and they asked questions later. And after they killed that brother, instead of the prosecution prosecuting the case like prosecutors do, prosecuting the case against the damn killer, that prosecution turned into counsel for the damn killer. They came up with every excuse under the sun to justify the killing of a 12-year-old boy. To justify it. But here you have 150 armed militiamen, and nobody's taking up arms against them. Nobody's rushing in to take them out. But yet a little black boy with a gun, a toy gun is gunned down like his life means absolutely nothing. That's how they deal with black people. You don't even have to be armed with anything and they'll take your life. But here you had these white people armed to the teeth, taking over federal buildings, and they want to handle these damn terrorists with kid gloves. We have the example of the brother Laquand McDonald in Chicago. His brother was walking away from the police, walking past the police, and they shot him 16 times. And most of the shots were fired when the brother was on the ground, incapacitated. That's how they deal with black people. But when it comes to these white people, it's hands off. When it comes to these white people, it's time to negotiate. It's time to talk them down. It's time to reach some kind of agreement with these people. Sick. It's just a reminder of what kind of country we live in. It's just another reminder. And even though I mentioned, some examples of what has happened to black people when we take up arms, like in Philadelphia with the MOVE organization, I think that perhaps if we had a more militant posture, if we were willing to die if necessary, if we had a slogan of freedom or death and lived by that slogan, then perhaps we would be in a better place today as a people. Instead of groveling around, begging these people to treat us right. Instead of depending on these people to have sympathy for us, people who have never had sympathy for the black man and woman. Trying to appeal to the conscience of these people that don't have any conscience. Maybe we need to have a more militant posture. In fact, it's not a question of maybe. It's a question of necessity. That's what we need. A more militant posture when we confront our problems. When we confront the issue of racism. We need a do or die type of mentality. We need a freedom or death mentality. We need to follow in the footsteps of Brother Malcolm X.